Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Settle in. However you are lying right now, however the pillow has arranged itself under your head, that is the right way. There is nothing to fix and nothing to arrange. You have found your way here, to the end of the day, and that is enough. Tonight we are going to spend some slow, unhurried time with a very small and very old book. It is called the Udana. That is the whole of its name. Udana. You can let the word sit there for a moment without doing anything with it, the way you might let a stone warm in your hand without needing to know what kind of stone it is. We will come to what it means. We have all night. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to listen. Nothing at all. You do not need to believe anything, or agree with anything, or remember anything. There will be no lesson at the end that you are meant to have absorbed. There is nothing to figure out here, nowhere else to be, no part of this you are supposed to keep. If your mind drifts off in the middle of a sentence, and you wake somewhere in the 7th chapter with no idea how you got there, that is not a failure. That is exactly the thing working the way it is meant to work. Before we begin, if you feel like it, and only if you feel like it, you might leave a small note wherever you are listening, telling us what time it is where you are, and what kind of night it is outside your window. A dark one, a cold one, a city full of sound, or a quiet house where everyone else is already asleep. It is a small thing, but it is a lovely thing to know that as one voice reads this out in the dark, there are others in other rooms, in other hours, all lying down at the same time, in the same quiet, listening to the same old words. You are not the only one awake. You never really are. Now, take a slow, deep breath. In through the nose, gently, no need to fill all the way. And then let it go, slower than you took it in, letting the shoulders come down, letting the jaw come loose, letting the small muscles around the eyes stop holding. That breath you just let out, hold on to the feeling of it for a moment, because it turns out that breath is the whole secret of the book we are about to spend the night with. We will come back to it. But let yourself notice it now, the way a breath let out, all on its own, without anyone asking you to, just leaves the body when the moment is right. Thank you for joining us here at Relaxing Subjects. Let us begin. Here is the thing that makes this little book different from almost everything else in its whole tradition. And it is a strange thing, once you notice it, the kind of thing that changes not what you are hearing, but the way it feels to hear it. Every other collection of the Buddha's words, or very nearly every one, is built out of questions and answers. Someone comes and asks. Someone is troubled and asks. Someone doubts something, and the doubt is corrected. A monk wants to know how a thing works, and it is explained to him, step by step, the way you would explain the workings of a lock to someone who has never held a key. That is the shape of the tradition. Somebody asks, and an answer is given. Somebody is confused, and the confusion is taken apart, gently, and put back together in a way that holds. It is a tradition of questions being met, of people being taught. And that is a good thing. There is nothing wrong with being taught. But it is not what tonight is. Because there is one collection, one small book, among all the others, where that is not what is happening at all. The Udana holds exactly 80 short passages. 80, and the thing that binds them together, the thread that runs through all 80 and makes them one book rather than 80 scattered scraps is this: not one of them is the answer to a question. Let that land for a second, because it is easy to hear and hard to actually feel. 80 utterances, and not one of them is a reply. Nobody asked. In each one, something happens, a scene, a moment, a storm, a death, a man arriving out of a crowd, and then, at the end of it, out of the quiet, a few words are simply said. Spoken to no one in particular. Not handed to a student. Not given to fix a problem someone brought. Just said, out loud, because the moment meant something, and the meaning of it rose up and came out as speech. The rest of the canon, you might say, is a conversation you are being invited to join. This one is a conversation you have wandered into the edge of, in a garden, at dusk, where a person you happen to respect is sitting quietly, and after a long silence they say one true thing out loud, not to you, not to anyone, and you happen to be close enough to hear it. That is the whole of the difference, and it is everything. Think for a moment about how much of your day is made of instruction. How much of the noise that has followed you into this bed is somebody, somewhere, telling you to do something. Drink more water. Sleep earlier. Answer this. Fix that. Try this new way of breathing, this new way of thinking, this new set of steps that will finally sort you out. Every voice, all day, has an ask folded inside it. Do this. Become this. Change, even the kind voices, even the ones that mean well, even the ones that love you. So much of what reaches you arrives, shaped like a request, or an order, or a suggestion you are somehow meant to act on. And by the time the day is done, by the time you are lying here, it can feel as though there is no such thing as simply being spoken to, only being told what to do next. So here is a book with no ask in it. That is the rarest thing it offers. Not wisdom, exactly. There is plenty of wisdom in the tradition, and much of it far more systematic than this. What this book offers, the thing you cannot get from the others, is the experience of overhearing rather than being instructed. Nobody in these 80 little scenes is trying to get anything from you. Nobody is waiting to see whether you understood. The words are already out. They were said before you arrived, and they will go on being true whether or not you take a single one of them with you into sleep. You are just close enough tonight to hear them. Now the word itself. Udana. I told you we would come back to the breath, and here is why. The word is old, and like a great many old words, it is really two smaller pieces pressed together. The first piece is ud. It means up or out, the direction of a thing rising or a thing leaving. Water welling up out of a spring. Smoke going up off a fire. A bird lifting off a branch. Up and out, away from where it was held. That is ud. And the second piece comes from an, which is a very simple, very bodily root. It means to breathe. Put them together and you have quite literally a breathing out. An up-breath, an out-breath. An exhalation. That is what the word udana means at its root, before it means anything grander. It means a breath let go. Translators have leaned on this for a long time, because it is too lovely and too apt to leave alone. They call an udana an inspired utterance, a solemn utterance, a joyous exclamation. But underneath all of those, the plainest reading, the one closest to the bone of the word, is simpler than any of them. It is the thing that leaves you when you can no longer hold it in. The sound a person makes, not because they decided to speak, but because the moment reached a certain fullness and something had to come out, the way breath comes out when the lungs are full, not chosen, not aimed, just released. You have made an udana yourself many times without ever knowing it had a name. Think of the sound you make when you finally sit down after a very long day, that long. Low breath out. That word that is barely a word. Think of what leaves you when you come over the top of a hill and the whole valley opens out below you all at once, green and enormous, and before you have decided anything, before you have formed a single sensible thought, a sound is already out of your mouth. Oh, just that. Think of what you say when you are alone in a room and you finally understand a thing you have been turning over for weeks. And it clicks into place, and you say something soft to the empty air, not to anyone. There is no one there, just the truth of it coming out of you like breath. That is an Udana. That is the whole genre. This entire book is 80 of those. 80 moments where the fullness of something reached the top, and a few words came out on the exhale, spoken to the empty air, and someone happened to be there to write them down. And so the very shape of the word tells you how to listen tonight. Not as though someone is teaching you something you must catch and keep, but as though you are lying near a window on a warm evening, and every so often, from the next room, you hear the sound a person makes when they let out a breath, and, on that breath, a handful of true words. You are not being asked to catch them. You could not hold a breath even if you tried to. You are only near enough to hear it leave. Let me tell you where this little book actually sits, so that it is a real thing to you and not just a mood. Because it is a real book, with a real address, on a real shelf, and there is something steadying in knowing exactly where a thing lives. The whole body of the earliest teachings is gathered into a great collection, so large it was carried for centuries in the memories of people before it was ever written down, passed mouth to mouth, night after night, the way a family carries a song. One of the 3 great baskets of that collection is called the Sutta Piyaka, the basket of discourses, and it is enormous. And within that basket, tucked at the very end, is a division with a modest, almost apologetic name. It is called the Khuddaka Nikaya, which means, more or less, the collection of minor texts. The small pieces, the short ones, the ones that did not fit neatly into the longer, grander groupings, and so were swept together at the end into a home of their own. Do not let the word minor fool you. Some of the most loved and most quoted words in the entire tradition live in that so-called minor collection, precisely because the short pieces are the ones people can carry. It is the shelf of small, portable things, and on that shelf, the Udana is the 3rd book. You can picture the little row of them if you like. It might help you settle to have them in an order. Like books, along a windowsill. First on the shelf comes the Dhammapada, which many people have heard of even if they have never opened it, a book of verses, of sayings, the one that gets printed on the covers of things. Then, second, comes our book, the Udana. And then, just after it, third in the little row and leaning against it, is a book called the Itivuttaka, whose name means something like this was said, a gentle name for a gentle book, and a sibling to ours, another short collection, another gathering of small things, close enough to lean against. So there is our Udana, 3rd on the shelf of small texts, resting between the Dhammapada on one side and the Itivuttaka on the other. Between the book of verses and the book of this was said, a quiet neighbourhood, and inside it the arrangement is very simple, very even, the kind of tidy shape you could hold in your mind half asleep. 80 utterances, divided into 8 chapters, 10 in each, that is all, 8 rooms, 10 small things resting in each room. Nothing crowded, nothing overflowing. 8 and 10 and 80 round, calm numbers. A building with 8 rooms and the same number of quiet objects on the shelf of each, so that once you are inside it, you always know roughly where you are. Each of the 8 chapters takes its name from something in its first passage, the way an old house names its rooms after whatever stands in them. The first chapter is called Bodhi, which means awakening, because it opens in the first days after the Buddha's own awakening. The second is called Mukhalinda, after a serpent we will meet later tonight, coiled through a storm. The third is called Nanda, after a lovesick man. The fourth, Megya. The fifth, Soa. The sixth carries a name that means born blind, Jakanda, and that is the room where the blind men and the elephant are waiting, though we will not go in there for a while yet. The seventh is called Ka, which simply means small, the little chapter. And the eighth and last is named after a village, Paligma, 8 rooms. You do not need to remember a single one of those names. I only lay them out so that the house has a shape in the dark, so that as we move through it tonight, you have some sense of the size of the place, and the evenness of it, and the quiet. Now let me show you the shape of a single one of these 80 pieces. Because once you have felt the shape, you have felt the whole book, and then you can simply let the individual stories wash over you without holding on. Almost every one of the 80 follows the same pattern, and the pattern is soothing precisely because it repeats, the way waves are soothing because you know, without watching, that another one is coming. First, there is a small piece of plain prose, not verse, just ordinary sentences telling you the setting, where the Buddha was staying, what time of year it was, what happened, who came, or what occurred. It is scene setting, the way the first lines of any story tell you where you are before anything else. He was staying at such a place, in such a grove, and on that day this thing came to pass. Very grounded, very ordinary. A man arrives, a storm breaks, a monk sits down, a child is born. Someone dies. Whatever it is, the prose sets it quietly in front of you, like a hand placing a bowl on a table. And then, at the close of that little scene, comes a single sentence that appears again and again in nearly identical words all through the book. It is the hinge on which every one of them turns. It goes, more or less, like this, then the Blessed One, understanding the significance of this, on that occasion, uttered this inspired utterance, understanding the significance of this, on that occasion, uttered this inspired utterance, and then, after that sentence, comes a short verse, a few lines. That is the Udana itself, the breath let out, the thing said, the scene, then the sentence, then the verse. Scene, hinge, breath, over and over, 80 times, in 8 rooms. I want you to hear that hinge sentence a second time, slowly, because its repetition is not a flaw in the book. It is one of the gentlest things about it. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. It comes back, and comes back, and comes back, at the end of scene after scene, almost word for word each time. The way the same low note comes back at the end of each line of an old hymn. In another kind of book, that repetition might bore you. Here it does the opposite, it settles you. Because you learn its rhythm, and then a part of you starts to wait for it the way, half asleep, you wait for the next slow turn of a fan, or the next far-off car passing on a wet road. And each time it comes, it tells you the same wordless thing. You are still here. The pattern is still holding. You can let go a little more. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. It is almost a lullaby in itself, that line worn smooth by repetition, like a step worn smooth by feet. You will hear it many times tonight. Let it be a place to rest each time it comes. Now I have to be very careful and very honest with you about one thing, because it matters, and because a half-truth would spoil the very quiet I am trying to give you. I have been saying that nobody asked. That is the heart of it, and it is true. But it is true in a precise way, and the precision is part of the gift. It is not always the case that the scene has no question in it. Sometimes it does. Later tonight we will meet a man who begs, 3 separate times, to be taught. We will meet a monk who insists, against gentle advice, on going off to a beautiful grove by himself. There are requests inside some of these scenes. There is human wanting inside them. Plenty of it. People arrive with their hunger and their grief and their stubbornness, the same as people always have. So it would be a lie to tell you that not one soul in the whole book ever wanted anything. But look closely at where the asking lives and where the utterance lives, because they are not in the same place. The asking, when there is any, is down in the prose. It is part of the scene. It is one of the things that happened, and the utterance, the verse at the end, the breath let out, the actual Udana, that is never an answer to it. The man may beg to be taught, and he may even be taught, there in the prose. But the words that close the passage, the ones the whole book is named for, are not the teaching he asked for. They are something else. They are what rises up in the one who is watching, afterward, once the moment has fully arrived and shown what it was. Not a reply to the request, an exhalation at the meaning of the whole thing. So the accurate way to hold it, the way that keeps it airtight and honest, is this. The rest of the canon is, at bottom, a great long conversation, question and answer, doubt and correction, someone asking and someone explaining. And the Udana's one distinguishing mark, running through all 80 of its pieces, is the scene followed by the spontaneous verse. The overheard exhalation rather than the reply. Sometimes there is a question in the room. There is never a question in the breath. And that, in the end, is why this is the book for the hour you are in right now. Because you have been answered enough today. You have been told and advised and instructed and corrected and given steps and offered protocols. Until the very shape of instruction has stopped landing, the way a word repeated too many times stops sounding like a word. At this hour, another answer would just be more noise. But an overheard breath is a different kind of thing entirely. You do not have to do anything with an overheard breath. You cannot act on it. You cannot get it wrong. You can only be near it, and hear it leave, and let it be true whether or not you keep it. So that is what we are going to do tonight, slowly, one scene at a time. We are going to stand at the edge of a few of these 80 moments, not all 80, we do not need all 80, only a handful told fully, with their plain prose left intact, and their verses read slow. A serpent coiled through a storm. A man who came looking for a free meal and found something else. A king who gathered blind men around an elephant. A bar of iron, struck while it glowed, and its sparks going out one by one where no one could follow them. We will not rush any of them. We will let each scene stand, and then let the breath at the end of it simply leave, and we will be near enough to hear it go. There is nothing you need to hold on to from any of this. Not one name, not one number, not one verse. If you remember nothing at all in the morning, except the feeling of having overheard something quiet in the dark, that is the whole of it, and it is enough. Let us pause here for a moment before we begin the first scene. Take a slow, deep breath, in, gently, and then out. Longer than it came in, and that breath you just let out. Without deciding to, without anyone asking you to, that is an Udana too. That is the whole book. happening in your own chest. Notice how the body is a little heavier now than when we started. Notice the weight of your hands. Notice the places where you are held, the mattress under you, the pillow taking the weight of your head, the covers resting along your body like something laid gently over you by someone who wanted you to be warm. There is nowhere to go from here. There is nothing to answer. No one is asking you anything. Let the shoulders drop one more notch. Let the breath find its own slow way, in and out, with no one managing it. And when you are ready, in no hurry at all, we will continue together and step to the edge of the first scene, where a great storm is gathering over a sage who has only just awakened, and a serpent as large as the weather itself is beginning, very slowly, to move toward him through the rising water. So let us not step through just yet. Let us stand here a moment longer, right at the edge of it, in the last of the quiet before the story begins. And let me tell you a little about the shape of the thing we are about to overhear. Because the shape is the whole strange gift of this book, and once you feel it, every scene after it lands differently. There are 80 of these, 80 small scenes gathered long ago and kept, and here is the thing that makes them unlike almost anything else the tradition handed down. Not one of them, at heart, is the answer to a question. Sit with that for a moment, in the dark, with your eyes already closed. Nearly everything else that survives from those years is a conversation. Someone comes with a doubt, and it is untangled. Someone asks how a thing works, and it is explained, patiently, point by point. A monk is confused, and he is corrected. A king wonders, and he is answered. The whole vast body of it moves like that, back and forth, ask and reply, the way most teaching has always moved. You come with the empty cup of a question, and it is filled. This one book does something else. In this one book, no cup is held out. The scene is simply described, a place, a season, a person, something that happens, and then, at the end, a few lines are spoken that no one requested. They are not filling anyone's cup. They are just said out loud, into the air of that afternoon. And someone standing near enough wrote them down. The collection has a name and a place, though you do not need to keep either. It is called the Udana, and it sits on a particular shelf. If you were to walk the length of the old canon in order, you would come to a section called the Udana, which only means the collection of the smaller texts, the shorter and more intimate ones. And in there, third in line, this little book is shelved. On one side of it stands the Dhammapada, the one book of the tradition many people have actually heard of, all those tight little verses about the mind. On the other side stands the Itivutaka, whose name means roughly, thus was said. And tucked between those two neighbours, quiet, is ours. 80 utterances, arranged into 8 chapters, 10 to a chapter. A small, tidy, evenly built thing, like a house with 8 rooms, and the same soft lamp burning in each. And nearly every one of those 80 rooms is built the same way. First the scene. Then, at the close of it, one line arrives that you will hear again and again through the night, until it stops being a sentence and becomes almost a sound. The way a word repeated at the edge of sleep loses its edges. The line is this. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. That is all. A scene unfolds, something in it is quietly understood, and then, understanding the significance of this, the words come out. Not taught, not argued, not aimed at anyone. Breathed out. I want you to notice how that phrase itself is going to work on you tonight. It repeats. It repeats at the end of scene after scene, the same soft turn of words each time, like the tide reaching the same line of sand and drawing back, reaching and drawing back. There is nothing in it to solve. You will begin to hear it coming, and there is a particular kind of rest in that. In a sentence you already know the shape of before it arrives. Let it be a marker for you. Each time it comes, one more small thing has finished, and you may sink a little further. Now, I want to be honest with you about one thing, because a half-truth would not let you rest properly, and this is the kind of book that asks to be met plainly. It is not always the case that nobody in the scene says a word. Sometimes there is a person in there who is asking for something. Someone will beg 3 times over to be taught before it is too late. Someone will insist, against gentle advice, on having his own way. There are requests inside these scenes, and there are refusals, and there is longing. The people in them are as restless and wanting as any of us lying awake. So the strangeness is finer than no one ever asked anything. The strangeness is this: whatever asking happens inside the scene, between the people in it. And then the utterance at the very end, the few lines that give the whole book its name, that part answers no one. It is not the reply to the person who begged. It is not aimed back at the one who insisted. It rises up over the top of the whole scene, spoken as if to the evening itself, because the moment held a meaning, and the meaning had to go somewhere. The people in the story do not always hear it, but you do. You, lying here, in the dark, 2,500 years downstream. And that is the rarest thing I can offer you at this hour. Everywhere else, all day long, every voice that reaches you wants something back. Wants you to answer, to decide, to do, to become. Here, for once, there is a voice with no ask in it at all. You are not the student in the room. You are not being corrected or improved or filled. You are only the one who happens to be standing near the open door as something true is said and gets to keep it or let it go, exactly as you please. So that is the shape, a scene quietly told, a meaning quietly caught, and then a breath let out over it that we get to overhear. 8 rooms, 10 lamps each, and the same soft phrase closing every door. We are ready now. The first of the rooms is already dim around us, and the air in it is changing. Somewhere just ahead the season is turning heavy, the sky going the colour of slate, and a man newly woken from the deepest waking there sits very still beneath a tree, while the first fat drops begin to fall, and the water starts, slowly, to rise around him. His name, in the tradition, is Muchalinda. Say it quietly if you like. Muchalinda. A word that sounds, even in your mouth, like something slow moving through deep water. He was a nga. The word nga means, in the old language, a great serpent, a being of the deep earth and the hidden waters, vast and ancient, possessed of an intelligence the texts do not try to explain and do not need to. He was the king of his kind, and he lived beneath the earth near the tree where the Buddha had just woken up, in the weeks that followed the most complete waking there has ever been. The tradition does not say exactly how many days had passed. It says the weeks after the awakening, a period of quiet, of settling, of simply sitting with what had opened. The way you might sit for a long time after something very large has happened before you speak about it to anyone. The Buddha was still close to the tree. The place is sometimes called Uruvel, along the Nerajar River, in the northeastern part of what is now the state of Bihar in India. There was a tree. There was the ground beneath it. There was the open sky. And then the sky changed. A great storm came in. The tradition says it lasted 7 days. 7 days of rain, of water rising, of wind and darkness and cold, the kind of storm that does not pass quickly and does not ask permission. The kind that settles in and makes itself at home while the light goes elsewhere. And the Buddha sat still. He did not move to shelter. He did not look for a dry place. He sat as he had sat through the night of the awakening, with the same quality of stillness that had already passed through something the storm could not touch, and from beneath the earth the younger king Mukalinda emerged. Let us stay with that for a moment. A great serpent, rising from the deep ground, moving toward a man sitting alone in the rain. The tradition tells it plainly, without alarm. Mukalinda came up and coiled himself around the seated figure, not to constrict, not to threaten, but to shelter. He wrapped his coils 7 times around the Buddha's body, and he spread his hood wide above the Buddha's head, like an umbrella as large as a cloud, so that the rain fell everywhere around that small circle of sitting and nowhere within it. 7 coils, 7 days. The storm raged. Mukalinda held. The Buddha sat inside the shelter of that coiling, unmoved, in the dark and the rain and the howling, for the whole of those 7 days. On the 7th day, the sky cleared. The storm passed the way storms pass, not dramatically but simply, lightening at the edges, then going quiet, then gone. And Mukalinda uncoiled himself, slowly, and drew back, and took another form. The tradition says he took the form of a young man, a youth, standing before the seated Buddha, hands folded, head bowed. No one had asked for any of this. Mukalinda had not been summoned. There was no prayer, no ceremony. He came because he came. He sheltered because the moment asked it of him, not because anyone issued the request aloud. And then, after the 7 days, after the uncurling, after the young man stood there with bowed head, the Buddha spoke, not to Mukalinda directly, not in the form of a teaching or a discourse. He breathed out a verse. The text gives it in a few short lines that have a quality of utter simplicity, the kind of simplicity that only arrives on the far side of something immense. He spoke of bliss, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of harmlessness, the bliss of a heart no longer pulling at the world in hunger, no longer frightened of what the world might do to it. The bliss of the person who has set down the quarrel with everything, with other people, with their own nature, with the very texture of being alive. Nobody had asked what bliss felt like. Mukalinda had not asked. The young man standing in the clearing mud had not asked. The verse rose up because it had to, because the moment had held something real, and something real had to be said over it. That is what is happening in the 2nd chapter of the Udana. The chapter takes its name from this Nga king, this great shelter, this quiet verse at the end of a 7-day storm. The chapter is called the Mukalinda. And now, here, in this dark room where you are listening, the rain has already passed. The coils have already loosened. The young man has already bowed. What is left is only the verse, floating in the clean air after a storm, waiting for someone to overhear it. Let us pause here and let the stillness of that clearing settle a little. There is no hurry. We are not going anywhere. The Udana is arranged, as we said, in 8 chapters. The 2nd chapter is Mukalinda. But the 1st chapter sits before it, and its name is Bodhi, the word for awakening itself, the word that names the tree and the event both. To understand the Bodhi chapter, we have to go back a little further to the nights that came just before Mukalinda, to the nights that were themselves the event. Let us explore what the Bodhi chapter holds. The tradition says that on the night of the awakening, through the 3 watches of that night, the early hours, The middle hours, the hours before dawn, the Buddha sat with a single question, not what should I do, not what do I want, but how does this work? How does suffering come to be? What is the chain of it? Where does it begin, and where, if it can end, does it end? He took this question through the night in a particular way. He followed the chain forward, from the beginning of it, step by step, each link arising from the one before it. And then he followed it backward, from the end to the beginning. And then he followed it forward again and backward again, until the chain was fully known. The tradition calls this dependent origination, paika samupta in the Pali, the arising of things in dependence on conditions. There is a lot that could be said about dependent origination. Scholars have written lifetimes on it, but what the Bodhisuttas give you is not the doctrine. They give you the verses that arose at the end of each watch. When the knowledge was complete for that watch of the night, the moment held a meaning, and the meaning had to go somewhere, and a verse came. The verse at the end of the first watch says this, very nearly, when phenomena grow clear to the ardent, meditating one, his doubts all vanish, for he understands each thing with its cause. That is the utterance at the close of Udana 1.1. When the knowing fully arrives, the doubts do not need to be argued away or suppressed. They simply vanish. Like mist in the morning when the sun reaches it. The knowing is itself the end of the doubt. There are 3 of these in Udana 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3. 3 watches of the night, 3 verses. The first about the vanishing of doubt. The second, deepening it. The third, arriving at the far shore of it, at something that the text does not try to name, except by pointing at what it displaces, all suffering, all darkness, the net of the world losing its hold. 3 times through the night, after 3 passes through the chain, forward and backward and forward, a verse breathed out to no one. No one was there to ask. No one heard it, except the night itself, and the tree, and now you, listening here in the soft dark, 2,500 years later. What the Bodhisuttas offer you is something almost impossible to find elsewhere. Not a teaching on awakening, delivered to monks who need to understand it. Not an answer to someone's doubt. The raw exclamation, the breath let out at the moment itself. As close as the tradition ever gets to, this is what it was like. From the inside, the moment the knowing came in. You do not need to understand dependent origination to receive what these verses hold. The doctrine belongs to the scholars and the practitioners who live with it for decades. What belongs to you tonight is only this, that somewhere in the dark, in a night that has long since ended, someone knew something completely, and breathed it out because it had to go somewhere, and it went here, into this book. And the book is open in this room, and you are here. The doubts all vanish, each thing known with its cause. That is enough. Let us move a little further into the first chapter, the Bodhi chapter, because there is one more scene here I want to bring you, before we find our way to the named places where so much of this collection is quietly set. His name is Sangmaji. The sutta is Udana 1.8. He was a monk. He had been, before he was a monk, a husband. He had a wife, and they had a child. And then he had left that life to follow the practice, not cruelly, the text does not say so, but completely. He had gone. The life of a householder, with its attachments and its claims and its continuous negotiations between what we want and what we can hold, he had let it go and gone into the robes. But his wife did not let go. The text tells us she came to find him. She had heard where he was sitting. And she came, and she brought the child, their small child, and she stood in front of him. Now, you can feel what this moment is. You do not need to have lived this particular story to know its weight. She had every claim on him. The child was real and small, and their love was real, or had been. All the history of a shared life, the ordinary accumulation of it, the meals and the arguments and the years, stood with her in that clearing, in front of this man sitting still in his robes. She spoke to him. The text does not give us her exact words. It gives us only what she did. She placed the child in front of him. She said, "Here, your child. I cannot care for this child alone." And she walked away. And Sangmaji did not move. He did not reach for the child. He did not speak. He did not waver in the way that waving looks from the outside, the hands beginning to lift, the face beginning to change, the body beginning to lean toward what it used to hold. He sat as he had learnt to sit, with everything in him quiet, even this. Even this. His wife came back. The child was still there in front of him, unclaimed. She saw that he had not moved. The text does not say what she felt, and this is its wisdom. It lets you feel it without being told. She picked up the child, and she left. The Buddha had seen all of this. He was there, and he had watched it, and when it was over, when the woman had gone, and the silence had settled back in, he breathed out a verse. An exclamation. Not a lesson on non-attachment, not a discourse on the proper way to regard a former family. A breath let out, because something real had just been witnessed. The verse speaks of the person who holds nothing, wants nothing back, reaches for nothing that has passed. It is not cold. The tradition is not cold about this. It is something more difficult than cold. It is completely free. Nobody asked him what he had seen. Nobody asked what it meant. The verse arrived because the moment held a meaning, and the meaning found its way out as breath. You do not have to agree with Sangmaji. You do not have to find his equanimity admirable or even comprehensible. What the text is doing is not asking you to judge him or to learn from him or to become him. It is only telling you this happened. A man sat still through something that would have moved almost anyone. The one who watched him was moved to speak. And this is what was said. That is all. You can keep it or let it go, exactly as you please. Now let us find the places. Because one of the quiet pleasures of reading the Udana slowly, the way it is meant to be read, is that it is a text full of real locations. Named places, named groves, named towns and rivers and trees. They appear at the beginning of almost every sutta, the way a date and address appear at the top of a letter. This happened here, in this grove, under these trees, by this river. And something happens to you when you spend enough time with this book, in the presence of those names. They start to feel like rooms you have been inside. Not because you have visited them, almost certainly you have not, and some of them in their ancient form are not there to visit, but because you have heard them enough times, in the quiet of the reading, that they have taken up a small residence in you. Let us visit them together, gently, the way you might walk through a house in the dark, running your hand along the wall. The first is the grove at Svath. The city of Svath was in the ancient kingdom of Kosala, in the north of what is now India, near the border with Nepal. It was a large city, prosperous, busy, and just outside it was a park, a garden, given over to the Sangha, the community of practitioners, by a man named Anthapika. He purchased the land, and the land had been owned by Prince Jeta, and so it is called Jeta's Grove, Jetavana, in the Pali. Anthapika's Monastery. That full phrase, at Svath, in Jeta's Grove, in Anthapika's Monastery, appears in the Udana more often than any other. It is the refrain, the most frequent setting, the room the book returns to again and again. The teaching on the blind men and the elephant happens there. The leper Super Buddha, whose story we will come to next time, hears the Buddha teach there. Say it to yourself if you like. Svath Jeta's Grove. Say it the way you would say the name of a place you love, slowly, letting the sounds land. The second place is the bamboo grove at Riyagaha. Riyagaha was the capital of the ancient kingdom of Magadha, a rich, powerful city surrounded by 5 hills, full of the sounds of commerce and argument and the ordinary noise of human life. And near it, given by King Bimbisara of the tradition, was a grove of bamboo, Veluvana in the Pali, which simply means bamboo grove. The Buddha stayed there many times. The leper Super Buddha, again, lives near Riyagaha, and it is there that his story unfolds. Veluvana, bamboo grove. Imagine the particular sound of bamboo in a light wind, that hollow, airy clicking, each stalk tapping the next. The sound of something alive but not urgent, not going anywhere, just sounding, because the wind moves through it and the wind is here. The third place does not need a name in the same way. It is where everything in the Udana ultimately points back to, the foot of the Bodhi tree. The place by the Nerajar River, at Uruvel, where the awakening happened, where Mukalinda rose from the earth and coiled himself 7 times, where 3 verses were breathed out through 3 watches of a night, and where everything the Udana holds began to enter the world. The tree itself, a fig tree, a people tree, called the Asattva in the Pali, the Bodhi tree meaning simply the tree of awakening, is still there, or a descendant of it is still there. The one at Bodh Gaya in Bihar is said to be rooted in the original. You can go and sit beneath it, and people do every day in the 21st century on hard stone floors or on folded mats in the heat and the noise of a pilgrimage town, and sit and be still. But you do not need to go anywhere. The tree is already here, in the sound of these words, in the dark of this room, in the simple fact that somebody sat beneath it one night and breathed out something true, and the words found their way across all the distance to where you are lying now. The 4th setting is named in the last chapter of the Udana, and we will come to it in time, Paligma, a small town that would grow, later, into one of the great cities of the ancient world. But for now it is just a name, a place on a river. The kind of place you pass through on the way somewhere else, not knowing yet that something important will happen there. 8 chapters, 4 main settings, and a few others. A whole world, small enough to hold in 2 hands, large enough to spend a lifetime in. The thing that strikes you, reading the Udana with attention, is how still all these places are. The Pali texts are full of cities, full of arguments and politics, and the messy clatter of the ancient world. But the Udana's scenes are nearly always set in the grove, or the garden, or the open space, just at the edge of things, where the city noise fades out and something quieter comes in. Jeta's Grove, the bamboo clicking in the wind, the foot of a tree by a river in the early morning. That is not accidental. The utterances arise in stillness. They do not arise in the middle of a debate or a meal or a royal court, not in this book. They arise in the moments between. The moments where the world has taken a breath itself, and something that was compressed by the noise of living has room to expand into the air. You know those moments. You have had them. Maybe not beneath ancient trees, but in the particular silence of a kitchen at 5 in the morning before anyone else is awake, or in a car stopped at a railroad crossing while the train goes by, or in exactly the place you are in right now, the world outside doing whatever it does, and you here, in the quiet between waking and sleep, in a moment that has room in it. The utterances of the Udana are made for exactly that kind of room. Let us pause here for a moment. We have been to the foot of the Bodhi tree in the weeks after the awakening, in the dark of the night that changed everything, and we have heard the first verses breathed out to no one. The doubts vanishing like mist, each thing known with its cause. We have sat through a 7-day storm with a great coiling serpent as shelter, and we have heard the verse that arrived on the other side of it, in the clear air after. We have watched a man sit unmoved while everything his former life held was placed in front of him, and we have heard the breath that the watching of that drew out. And we have visited the groves, Jetta's grove at Svath, the bamboo grove at Ryagaha, the foot of the tree, the small town of Paligma, waiting with what it holds. These are the rooms of the Udana, 8 of them. We have been inside 2 already, and the others are ahead of us, quiet and ready, and we will come to them when we are ready. For now, take a slow, deep breath. Notice the weight of your body wherever it rests, the particular temperature of the air around you. The way the dark in this room has a quality to it, not absence, but presence. The dark of this room is not empty. It has been, for a few minutes, a grove, a clearing after rain, a garden outside a city in a country that exists now only in these words. That is where you are. Take another breath. Let it go slowly, the way the text itself lets things go, without force, without urgency, without asking anything in return. When you are ready, we will continue. There is more ahead, a leper in a crowd looking for food, and a king with men born blind, and a great ocean with a single taste, but all of it is waiting patiently, in the next room, with the lamp turned low. For now, rest here, in the clearing after the storm. The coils have loosened, and the young man has bowed and gone. The tree stands over us still. The night is full of the sound of dripping water, that clean sound of a world rinsed back to its simplest self. Somewhere, maybe, you are beginning to drift. If you are, let that happen. You do not need to hold on to any of what we have said. None of it requires remembering. The verses breathed out to no one have already been breathed. They do not need you to carry them. They carry themselves. And if you are still here, still with me, that is also fine. The next room is the 5th chapter. The 3rd chapter, the Nanda chapter, is there too, with its half-brother lovesick for someone he has left behind, practicing until he wants nothing and is freed from the wanting of wanting itself. And the 4th chapter, the Meghiya chapter, where a monk insists on the beautiful grove and finds it full of unwholesome things. But we will come to them in time. In the natural time, the Udana is not in a hurry, neither are we. Take a breath. Let the word come up through you the way an Udana comes, not summoned, not directed, not in answer to any question. Just the quiet exhalation that rises when the moment holds something real. Something was known in those nights by the river. It found its way out as breath. The breath found its way into a book, the book found its way across 2,500 years and into this room. And here, in the stillness, it rests with you. The light is low. The groves are very quiet. Somewhere the bamboo is sounding its hollow note in a wind that comes from very far away. And the sound of it is the sound of nothing needing to be different from what it is. Rest, we are in the 2nd chapter now. The Mukalinda chapter. It begins, as so many of the chapters begin, with a storm. The weeks after the awakening were not quiet weeks. There is a tendency, when we imagine that time, to picture a serene progression, a sage moving gently from tree to tree in a garden of unbroken peace. But the text does not quite say that. The text says there was a great storm. 7 days of it. Rain and wind and darkness where there had been open sky, and the man who had just understood the nature of suffering was sitting still in the middle of all of it, undisturbed. And then something came. Mukalinda. Say the name slowly if you like. Mu-Chalinda. It has a sound like water over stone. He was a Nga king, a great serpent being, in the tradition's understanding of things, neither simply a snake nor simply a god, but something older, something that lives in the earth and in the deep water and belongs to the world as it was before we named it. And Mukalinda came out of his dwelling place beneath the roots of the tree. He saw what was happening. He saw the rain. He saw the seated figure. And he did what the text says he did. He coiled his body around the Buddha 7 times, and he spread his great hood overhead like a canopy. Against the rain, against the cold, against the wind that came for 7 days and would not stop. No one had asked him to do this. The Buddha had not called for shelter. There was no negotiation, no instruction, no teaching given and received. There was only the storm and the stillness inside it, and a serpent who came and made himself into a kind of house around that stillness. On the 7th day the storm ended, and Mukalinda uncoiled himself and took the form of a young man and stood there with his hands together and his head bowed. And the Buddha spoke, not to answer a question. No one had asked anything. He spoke because the moment held something, because understanding arose in him the way the word Udana says understanding arises, the way a breath rises, unbidden. He said, happy is seclusion for one who is content. Happy is non-affliction, the restraint toward living beings. Happy is dispassion in the world, the passing beyond sensual pleasures. The removal of the conceit I am, that truly is the highest happiness. 4 lines. That is the whole of it. And then the chapter simply moves on. There is something about that ratio, 7 days of storm, 7 coils of shelter, 7 days of simply being protected, and 4 short lines at the end that stays with a person. The vast preparation and the small utterance, the immensity of what was known and the brevity of what was said. And perhaps that is not so different from the way it works inside a person, inside a life. We go through long storms, and something holds us, and when it is over, we find we have only a few words for what the experience meant. And those few words are the true ones. Let the rain from that chapter settle around you for a moment. But the second chapter is not the beginning. The first chapter is. And the first chapter is called the Bodhi chapter, Bodhi meaning awakening, and it begins at a moment we almost never get to overhear. The very first nights. The tradition says that in the first watch of that first night, the night of the awakening, something was understood about how things arise. Dependent origination. How this being, that arises. How from this ceasing, that ceases. He traced it forward through the chain, and backward through the chain, and both ways at once, and the understanding was complete, and the doubts began to vanish the way stars vanish at dawn, one by one, and then all at once, and then the sky is simply clear, and you cannot remember there having been stars. The utterance that came from the first watch says, when phenomena grow clear to the ardent, meditating one, his doubts all vanish, for he understands each thing with its cause. Doubts vanish. Not because someone argued against them, not because a question was answered, but because something was understood so completely that the doubts simply had nowhere left to stand, like stones on a floor that has been taken away. He sat there through the second watch, through the third, and from each watch another utterance arose, and none of them were answers, they were exhalations. the breathing out of a mind that had come to the end of a very long night and found, waiting there at the edge of dawn, something that the darkness could not hold. Those first three utterances, the Bodhi Suttas, Udana 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Three small flames in the text, close together, near the beginning, the way a fire looks when it has just been lit and has not yet understood its own heat. And a few suttas on from them, in the same first chapter, there is a monk named Sangmaji. He is sitting, quietly, in the way that monks who have practiced for a long time sometimes sit, very still, with no performance of stillness, just the actual thing itself. And his former wife comes, she has their child with her, and she stands near him and speaks and tries to reach him. The text does not give us her words. We only know that she came, and that she spoke, and that she placed the child nearby, and that he did not move toward it, and did not move away. He simply remained. Not cold. The text does not say cold. Unmoved, the way a deep lake is unmoved by a stone dropped near its edge, the ripples travel outward and do not disturb what is underneath. She left. He remained. And the Buddha, understanding the significance of this, uttered an inspired utterance. He did not explain what Sangmaji had done, or why it was notable, or what others should learn from it. He simply breathed out his understanding of the moment. The monk who had found something steady enough that he did not need to grasp and did not need to push away. That kind of stillness. These things happened at places with names. The text gives the names, and the names have a sound like rooms you might walk through in a dream. Jeta's Grove at Svath. Anthapika's monastery, with the groves and the paths through them, and the rooms where the lamps burned low at the end of long evenings of teaching. The bamboo grove at Rajagaha. Veluvana, the sound of bamboo at night is a particular sound, if you have ever heard it, a hollow, patient sound, as if the wood has learned something about emptiness and is not keeping its secret. The foot of the Bodhi tree itself, the place where the ground was still, and the night was still, and the storm had not yet come, or had already passed, and there was only the sitting, and the understanding, and the first small breath of what would become a book. These are the rooms of the Udana, not buildings, not libraries, groves and riverbeds and the spaces underneath large trees where the light comes through unevenly and the air is a little cooler than the air in the open field. Take a slow breath now. Notice what has eased in you since we began. There may be something, a small thing, the size of a question you were carrying that has set itself down somewhere near your feet and is resting there, not gone, just resting. The way questions do when the night is long enough and the voice is unhurried enough and there is nothing being required of you. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a sutta in the 5th chapter of the Udana. Its name in Pali is the Kuhi Sutta. In English, translators have called it simply the leper. It is the 3rd passage in that chapter, and it is one of the shorter ones. The prose setting takes perhaps a minute to read aloud, and the verse that follows is only a handful of lines, but it has stayed with readers for a very long time. The way certain small rooms stay with you after you have left a house. You cannot always say why. The room was not the grandest room. It did not have the best view. But something about the proportion of it, the light in it, the particular quality of the quiet inside it, you find yourself thinking about it years later when you are not thinking about anything in particular. This is that kind of sutta. The scene is set in Rajagaha, that is the city near the bamboo grove, the place where the hollow sound of the bamboo at night becomes a kind of teaching in itself, if you are patient enough to sit with it. Rajagaha was a significant city in the time of the Buddha, a royal city, a busy city, a city with markets and roads and the ordinary crowded motion of people going about their days. And on this particular day, somewhere in that city, there was a crowd gathering. The man who saw the crowd was named Buddha. He was a leper. The text says this plainly, without softening it. The Pali word is kuhi, and it means someone whose body had been taken over by the disease in a visible and disfiguring way. In the world of that time and place, this was not simply a medical condition. It was something that separated a person from the ordinary flow of life, from the markets, from the gathering places, from the events where people came together. Leprosy carried a weight that was social as much as it was physical. The body announced its own exile. Buddha was, as the text describes it, destitute, poor in the most basic sense, no resources, no position, no one waiting for him at the end of the day. And he saw the crowd. Now, when you are destitute and you see a crowd gathering in a city, there is a reasonable interpretation of what that crowd might mean. It might mean that food is being distributed. It might mean that some form of material support is being offered to those who have need of it. People who are truly hungry understand this calculus immediately, the way the body does its own arithmetic before the mind has finished thinking. The crowd was there. Food might be there. He moved toward it. He was wrong about the food. What was there instead was the Buddha teaching, let us stay with that moment for a breath before we continue. A man who came for one thing and found another. Not a dramatic arrival, not a pilgrim who had walked for weeks, not a seeker who had spent years preparing himself for a great encounter. A hungry man who followed a crowd because he hoped there might be something to eat, and who found himself standing at the edge of a teaching instead. The Buddha, perceiving this, and the text, uses a word that suggests a kind of direct, clear seeing, the way you might see exactly what is in front of you when the light is right and nothing is obscuring your view. The Buddha perceived Buddha and his situation and his readiness. And the Buddha gave what the tradition calls the graduated talk. This is a particular form of teaching, a stepwise unfolding that begins where the listener actually is and moves, one layer at a time, toward what is deeper. It begins with giving, then virtue, then the heavens, the possibility of goodness and its fruits, then the danger of clinging to pleasures, the way they promise more than they deliver and leave a person always slightly behind what they were reaching for, then the beauty of release from that reaching, and then the Four Noble Truths, suffering, its origin, its cessation. The path. Buddha understood. The text says that while he was sitting there, even as the teaching was happening, a clear and stainless vision of the Dhamma arose in him. The dust settled, in the old phrase. The way it settles after a long wind has moved through a field, and suddenly you can see the shape of things plainly, and the shape of things is not frightening. He attained what the tradition calls stream entry, sotpana. He had entered the current that would, in this life or in lives to come, carry him all the way to full liberation. He had seen something that could not be unseen. He got up, he paid his respects, he left. He did not have a long walk home. Not far from the crowd, not long after he had left the teaching, a young heifer gored him. The text says he died of that wound. Within an hour, perhaps, we are not given the exact measure of time, only the proximity, the sense that the space between his awakening and his death was very small, smaller than a morning. The disciples came to the Buddha afterward and asked about him. It is the kind of question you ask when something like this happens, and you need to understand what it means. This man, this leper, who came for food and found the teaching and was struck by something real, and then died. Where is he now? What happened to him? The Buddha said he had been reborn in the Tvatisa heaven. The name means, roughly, the 33, one of the celestial realms the tradition describes, a place of great light and long duration, associated with clarity and the company of other beings who have seen clearly. And the Buddha called him a wise man, someone who had understood the Dhamma, someone who had crossed over doubt. And then, understanding the significance of this, the Blessed One uttered this inspired utterance. That is the formula: seen, and then the breath. The verse itself turns on something that might seem paradoxical at first, though it settles into something steady if you stay with it. Those who see rightly, the verse says, those in whom the clear vision has arisen. They do not stand arguing about the nature of things the way those who have not seen clearly do. They have gone somewhere that the arguing cannot follow. Now, before we continue, there is something that needs to be said clearly, because the name Supabuddha is a name that appears elsewhere in the tradition attached to a completely different person. There is another figure in other texts, a Sakyan nobleman named Supabuddha. A different life, a different story, a different outcome. The same name, two different people. The Supabuddha of the Kuhi Sutta, the leper of Rijagaha, who came for food and found the Dhamma and died before the crowd had fully dispersed, he is himself. Not the nobleman. The tradition keeps them separate, and so do we. What stays with me about this story, and I mean this in the sense that I find it returning when I am not looking for it, the way the proportions of a certain small room return to you years later, is the ordinariness of how it began. He was not spiritually prepared. He was not cultivated. He was not seeking. He was hungry and cold in the ordinary way that destitution makes a person cold, and he saw a crowd, and the reasonable interpretation of that crowd was food. In the whole enormous literature of the tradition, there are hundreds of stories of seekers who prepared for years, who undertook great disciplines, who renounced things deliberately and systematically, and with full understanding of what they were doing. And those stories are real and valuable and worth knowing. And then there is this one, a man who was going somewhere else entirely. The utterance that follows his story was not asked for. No one in the crowd turned to the Buddha after Supabuddha left and said, "Please, explain to us the significance of what just happened." The text does not record a question. The significance simply arrived. The Buddha perceived it, the way the significance of a moment sometimes arrives before you have had time to frame a question about it. And the verse followed. That is the shape of the Udana. That is what it keeps doing. We are moving now to the 6th chapter of the collection. The chapter is called Jakanda, which means something like born blind or blind from birth, and the name tells you exactly what you are about to encounter. The scene is set in Svath. That is the city near Jeta's Grove, the place with the paths through the trees and the rooms where the lamps burned low at the end of long evenings. Svath was also a royal city, a city with a king, and it is the king who begins this particular story. The king of Svath. The text is specific enough about the setting that we understand this is a king with real authority in a real city. Caused a number of men who had been blind from birth to be assembled, and then an elephant was brought in front of them. not a depiction of an elephant, not an explanation of an elephant. The elephant itself, standing in whatever space was prepared for this, very much present in the way that elephants are present, which is to say, substantially, in a way that cannot be ignored. Each man was brought to a different part of the elephant and allowed to touch it. One man put his hands on the head. One man touched the ear. One man felt the tusk. One man put his hands on the trunk. One man touched the body, the side of it, the great warm barrel of the body. One man put his hands on a foot. One man felt the back, the broad back. One man touched the tail. One man felt the tuft at the end of the tail, those coarse individual hairs. Then they were asked, "What is an elephant?" The man who had touched the head said, "An elephant is like a water jar. Large, rounded, smooth in places, with a particular curve to it." The man who had touched the ear said, "An elephant is like a winnowing basket. Flat, wide, slightly irregular at the edge, something you could hold if it were small enough to hold." The man who had touched the tusk said, "An elephant is like a ploughshare. Long, smooth, tapering, hard." The man who had touched the trunk said, "An elephant is like a plough pole. Long in a different way, flexible, alive in the hand, capable of movement." The man who had touched the body said, "An elephant is like a storeroom or a granary. Vast, contained space whose walls stretch further than you expect when you press your hands against them." The man who had touched the foot said, "An elephant is like a pillar, round, thick, rising from the ground with the solidity of something that does not expect to be moved." The man who had touched the back said, "An elephant is like a mortar, broad and slightly concave, built to receive weight." The man who had touched the tail said, "An elephant is like a pestle, cylindrical, tapering, firm." The man who had felt the tuft of hair said, "An elephant is like a broom, rough and fibrous at the end, a scatter of separate strands gathered into something that moves together." Each man knew what he knew. Each man had held what he had held. Each man spoke from what his hands had told him, and what his hands had told him was true. The head is, in its way, like a water jar. The ear is, in its way, like a winnowing basket. None of them were lying. None of them were confused about what they had actually felt. And they came to blows over it. The text uses that phrase without elaboration. They quarrelled. They argued. What began as incompatible descriptions became a dispute about who was right and who was wrong, about whose hands had told them the true shape of the thing, about whether a water jar or a winnowing basket was closer to the truth of an elephant. And the arguing was real arguing, the kind that has heat in it. Because each person was certain, genuinely certain, not performing certainty, and the certainty of one person contradicted the certainty of another, and there was no way to resolve it from inside the argument itself. The Buddha applied this to the religious teachers and their followers of his own time. Various sectarians, the text calls them, people who held particular views about the nature of the world and the self and what is real and what is not, and who had attached themselves to those views with the conviction of someone whose hands have touched one part of something vast and concluded they know the whole of it, each grasping a piece, each insisting that the piece they have grasped is the complete truth of the matter. The verse that follows says something spare and precise about this. Those who are attached to views, seeing only one side, they engage in quarrels and disputes. And the closing line of the verse, in some translations, is something to the effect that those who see this for what it is, who understand the nature of partial seeing, do not quarrel in the same way. The poem does not tell them what the elephant is, it tells them what the quarrel is. Understanding the significance of this, the Blessed One uttered this inspired utterance. Not a lecture on the theory of truth, not a doctrine to be adopted in place of the ones being argued about. A breath, an exhalation, scene, and then the verse. Now, and this is the part of this story that I find quietly interesting, in the way that small historical puzzles are interesting when you are half asleep and not pressing on them too hard. This parable did not stay inside the Buddhist tradition. It moved. It crossed into Jain tellings, where similar versions appear. It appears in Hindu texts at various points, in forms related to this one. It travelled, as stories travel, along the routes that ideas take when they are vivid enough to survive the crossing. And then in 1872, a poet named John Godfrey Saxe published a poem in English. He titled it The Blind Men and the Elephant. He presented it as a Hindu fable. The poem begins, and you may know these lines, or half know them from some classroom or management seminar where they were written on a board. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined. Each of the 6 touches a different part, each draws his confident conclusion. And the poem ends with the observation that all of them were partly right, and all of them were wrong. Saxe's poem became widely known in the English-speaking world. It became a stock reference, the kind of thing you use to explain to someone that different perspectives each hold a partial truth, that the thing being described is larger than any single account of it. You will find it in presentations about organizational behavior and interfaith dialogue, and the nature of scientific models and the philosophy of perception. It is a remarkably portable parable. And most people who quote it or think of it have no idea that its oldest surviving written form is a Buddhist scripture sitting in the 6th chapter of the Udana, which is itself sitting in the 3rd book of the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is part of the Sutta Pitaka, part of the Pali Canon, that has been copied and read and memorized across centuries by people in robes in monasteries whose names most of us will never know. That does not mean the Buddhist version is the origin in any absolute sense. The story is old enough and widespread enough that no single tradition owns it. Jain scholars have versions too. The image is, in some sense, a shared inheritance of the South Asian imagination, a parable that arose from the encounter between thought systems that were all trying to account for something very large and finding that their hands kept giving them different answers. The honest thing to say is that the Udana preserves the oldest surviving written version that we can date and verify. Not that the Buddhists invented it. That the text has been here, quietly, for a very long time, waiting for someone to trace the poem back to its source. 2,000 years between Svath and the American classroom, where a teacher writes 6 men of Indostan on the board. The story travelled a very long way without losing its essential shape. Something in it is sturdy. Something in it keeps surviving the crossing. What I find worth sitting with in the version in the Udana is the detail of the quarrel, not the parable in its gentle pedagogical form. Here are different perspectives. Each has some truth. Isn't that something to consider? The version in the Udana has people actually fighting, coming to blows. The dispute is not abstract. It has the temperature of real disagreement. The kind that happens when someone is sure they are right and someone else is equally sure, and there is no common ground to stand on, because the ground they are each standing on is different. The Buddha does not resolve the argument by telling them what an elephant actually is. The utterance that follows is not a correct description of an elephant. It is an observation about the nature of people who are attached to their partial view so completely that the partial view becomes the whole truth in their hands, and then becomes a reason to fight with someone whose partial view contradicts it. The teaching, if we want to call it that, carefully, gently, knowing that the whole point of the Udana is that this is not a teaching given in response to a request, but a breath that arrived. The teaching is not in the resolution of the argument, it is in the seeing of the argument for what it is. And nobody asked for that. The text does not record a disciple coming to the Buddha and saying, "We have heard that some men who were blind from birth were brought to an elephant, and we would like you to explain what this means for our understanding of sectarian disagreement." The Buddha perceived what the moment meant. The verse arrived. That is all we are told about the mechanism of it. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. In through the nose and out again, long and even. Notice where your body is in contact with what it is resting on. The weight of your legs, the back of your head against whatever is beneath it, the places where the warmth has gathered. If a thought has come in, and thoughts come in, this is what thoughts do in the night. Especially when you have been listening to something, and your mind has been following a thread, and the thread has slackened slightly. If a thought has come in, you do not need to press it away. It can sit where it has sat. You will not be doing anything about it tonight, and it knows this too, in whatever way thoughts know things. Let it be there. You are just listening. There is nothing required of you. The men who were blind from birth touched an elephant. One of them felt the tuft at the end of the tail, those coarse individual hairs, gathered together into something that moves as one, and he said, "An elephant is like a broom." He was not wrong about the tuft, he was wrong about the elephant. Or not wrong, exactly, incomplete. His hands had told him the truth about what they had touched, and what they had touched was real, and it was not the elephant. We spend a great deal of our lives like that man. Our hands have told us true things. We are not lying about what we have touched. But the thing itself is larger than what our hands have reached, and we have been arguing about it for a very long time. The Udana does not tell you what to do about this. It breathes and sets it down. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something worth saying about how this parable feels different when it is read in its original setting rather than lifted out of it and set in a presentation about organizational behavior. I do not mean this as a criticism of organizational behavior, which is its own legitimate concern. I mean only that the context changes the weight of it. In its original setting, the parable is embedded in a scene. The king of Svath arranged this. Real people with real blindness were brought to a real animal, and the quarrel that followed was a real quarrel, the kind that breaks out between people who are genuinely convinced and genuinely in conflict, and the Buddha sitting somewhere, not at the center of the scene, but perceiving it, breathed out a verse about the nature of that kind of attachment. When you read it that way, slowly, with the prose setting intact around it, the way Bhikkhu Ananda Jyoti presents it, the way John D. Ireland presents it in his translation titled Inspired Utterances of the Buddha. When you read it with all of that around it, it has a different quality. It is not a lesson delivered to you. It is something overheard. The king of Svath arranged this experiment. The men brought their conclusions, the argument broke out, and somewhere in the vicinity of all of that, a verse arrived. You were not in Svath. You are not being given instructions about how to hold your views more lightly or how to appreciate the perspectives of those who disagree with you. You are lying down in the dark, and a voice is reading you something very old, and the thing being read was said to no one in particular, and the voice is going very slowly, and there is no test at the end. This is the chapter called Jocanda, Born Blind. The name of the chapter is the name of the condition, not the name of a person, but the name of a state of being. A whole chapter of the Udana, named for the condition of not being able to see what is directly in front of you. There are 10 suttas in that chapter. We have been sitting with the 4th one, Udana 6. 4. The sutta of the blind men assembled before an elephant, the sutta whose story somehow travelled from Svath across 2,000 years to the English classroom and the management seminar and the interfaith dialogue, carrying its shape intact. The chapter sits between the 5th chapter, whose suttas include the leper who came for food, and the great ocean with its one taste, and the 7th. The smaller chapter, before the final chapter that gathers the utterances on Nibna at the edge of a town called Paligma. The whole collection is 80 suttas in 8 chapters of 10. And the chapters have names that read like the titles of rooms in a very quiet house. Bodhi, Mukhalinda, Nanda, Megya, Soa, Jocanda, Ka, Paligma. 8 rooms. A house you can walk through slowly in one night if the night is long enough. We have been in several of those rooms now. We sat for a while in the Mukhalinda chapter, where the serpent king coiled his great body 7 times around a seated figure and held a storm at bay for 7 days, and the verse that followed was about the bliss of seclusion and the happiness of one who sees and expects nothing. We moved through the Bodhi chapter, the 1st chapter, where the earliest inspired utterances arrived in the watches of the night beneath the Bodhi tree, doubts vanishing the way the dark vanishes when the light comes, not pushed away, but simply replaced by something that was always there. We sat with Sangmaji, the monk who was so still that even the one who most wanted him to move could not move him. And now we have been in the Soa chapter, where the leper Superbuddha came for food and found something else entirely, and where the heifer was waiting just past the edge of the crowd. And in the Jocanda chapter, where the men blind from birth were brought to the elephant, and each told the others, with great conviction, what an elephant was. The text moves through these rooms at its own pace. It does not hurry. It does not summarize. It presents the scene, and then it pauses, and then the verse arrives, and then the formula closes the sutta. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance, and then the next scene begins. That formula, let us stay with it for a moment, because it is doing something in the structure of the text that is easy to miss if you are reading quickly, and this is not a text designed to be read quickly. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. It appears 80 times, or close to it. Every sutta, every scene, the scene concludes, and the formula arrives, and then the verse. The formula is in Pali, etamatha viditv, understanding the meaning of this, perceiving the significance, ima udna udnesi, he breathed out this inspired utterance. When you read the translation with that formula present every time, something happens to the rhythm of the listening. The formula becomes a kind of refrain, a liturgical shape. A signal to the body that a verse is coming, the way certain musical progressions signal that the phrase is about to resolve. You begin to wait for it without knowing you are waiting. You begin to rest in the approach of it. That repetition is part of the text. It is not an accident of compilation. It is the way the Udana works on you over time, over the time of reading it, over many readings across many years, over the long sleep pace of a night like this one. The translators have all had to decide what to do with it. F. L. Woodward, whose 1935 translation for the Pali Text Society bore the title Verses of Uplift, a title that gives you a sense of the tonal register he heard in the text, something lifted, something buoyant. Woodward kept the formula in his version. John D. Ireland, whose translation published by the Buddhist Publication Society in Kandy, Sri Lanka, in 1990, is the one that circulates most widely in American Theravada communities, also kept it. Bhikkhu Ananda Jyoti, whose version is presented with the Pali and the prose settings fully intact, keeps it too. They all heard the importance of the refrain. They all understood that the repetition is not redundancy, it is how the text breathes. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. In some rooms of that quiet house, the significance is tender. The leper came for food and found something else, and was killed before the crowd dispersed, and the significance of that. The strange gift of it, the sheer unexpectedness of what happened in the space between one intention and another, is tender in the way that very few things are tender. Quietly devastating, I said earlier. I meant it. In some rooms the significance is vast. The men quarrelled about the elephant. The sectarians quarrelled about the nature of things. The quarrel has been going on, in one form or another, for as long as there have been people with hands that touch different parts of something large and conclude they have the whole of it. The significance of that is not small. And the Buddha breathed out a verse about it. Not a treatise, not a refutation, a breath. This is the thing about the Udana that I keep returning to, if I am honest about it. Not the doctrine, not the cosmology, the heavens and the rebirths and the noble truths delivered in the graduated teaching. Those things are real, and they are in the text, and they matter. But what keeps drawing me back, and I will not pretend to certainty about why, is the shape of the transmission. Seen, and then a breath. Something was perceived, something arrived. Nobody had to ask. There is a kind of conversation that works entirely by question and answer. Most conversations are like that. Most teaching is like that. Someone wants to know something, someone else answers. The wanting and the answering call each other into being. Without the question, the answer might never come. Without the answering, the question stays unresolved. The circuit requires both of them. And then there is the other kind, the moment that generates its own response without needing a question to open the door. The significance of something simply perceived and the breath that follows the perceiving. The Udana is a collection of those breaths. You do not need to have been asking the right question. You do not need to have been spiritually prepared. Super Buddha had not been preparing. He had been hungry. The blind men had not been preparing to receive a parable about the nature of partial knowledge. They had been brought to an elephant by a king and asked to describe it. The serpent king Mukalinda had not been waiting in his underground palace for 7 days with a philosophical question ready. He had been responding to a storm the way a serpent who lives in water responds to a great deal of water, which is to rise and shelter whatever needs sheltering. None of them had a question ready. And the verse came anyway. For a listener who is tired, truly tired, not just physically tired, but tired in the way you get tired of being given steps and protocols and morning routines and ways to optimize the quality of your rest and things you should be thinking about and things you should stop thinking about. For that listener, This text is strange and restful in equal measure. Strange, because it is very old and full of specific things, a leper named Buddha, a heifer, the Tvatisa heaven, a serpent king whose name is pronounced approximately Muchalinda, men blind from birth assembled in front of an animal in a city whose name was Svath. It does not smooth these things out into universal principles. It keeps its specificity the way the bamboo grove keeps its particular hollow sound. And restful because of all of that, this text asks nothing of you. It does not end with, and therefore you should. It does not close with, here are 3 things to try. It breathes out a verse and closes the sutta and opens another scene. The 6th chapter is named for the blind men who could not see what was directly in front of them. The 5th chapter holds the leper who came for food. The 3rd chapter is named for Nanda. The 2nd chapter is named for Muchalinda, the serpent king. The 1st chapter is named for the Bodhi tree, the tree under which the first breath arrived, before anyone in the world had heard of the Udana. Before there was a collection to be made, before there were 80 suttas in 8 chapters, before there was a scholar named Paul Steinthal who would make a critical edition in 1885, before there was a translator named Woodward who would call his rendering Verses of Uplift, before John D. Ireland would publish his translation for the Buddhist Publication Society, before Bhikkhu Anandajoti would make a version with the Pali and the prose settings intact for anyone who wanted to sit with the text in 2 languages at once. Before all of that, there was a night under a tree, and the first utterance breathed out. We will come to that chapter again, and we will come to what came after it, the chamber at the edge of a town, the utterances on Nibna, the words about the unborn and the unmade that reward being, read slowly more than almost anything else in the whole canon. We will come to the glowing iron and the sparks that go where no one can trace them. We will come to the ocean. But for now, the 6th chapter. Jacanda, born blind. The men argued about the elephant until the argument had heat in it, and the verse arrived. The leper came for food and found the deathless instead, and the verse arrived. The serpent king rose through 7 days of storm and held a great hood over a seated figure, and when the storm cleared and the serpent became a young man and bowed, the verse arrived. Each time, the formula. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. Each time, a breath. You are not being asked to agree with any of it. You are not being asked to adopt a set of views, to believe in the Tvatisa heaven, or the serpent kings of the underground waterways, or the cosmology that places the foot of the Bodhi tree at the center of a particular kind of night. You are being asked to do nothing at all. You are lying down in the dark, and a voice is reading you something very old, and the voice is going slowly, and the text keeps breathing. The tuft at the end of the tail. Coarse individual hairs. A broom, said the man who had felt it, with great conviction. He was not wrong about the hairs, and none of them were wrong. That is the teaching, breathed out over the arguing men, over the king who had arranged the whole thing, over the city of Svath, going about its evening. Not that the men were foolish, not that blindness is a failing, but that each had touched something real and then declared the whole from it, and the declaration had made them enemies. The verse did not tell them to change. The verse arrived because the moment meant something. That is the only reason any of them arrive. Take a slow breath if you like. There is nowhere to be. We have been in the 6th chapter. We have been in the 1st and the 5th and the 2nd. Now let us go to the 8th. The last chapter. Polygma, Paligma was a town. It sat near the Ganges, not far from where Rajagaha stood to the south. It was a real place, with real people and real dust on the road, and the Buddha passed through it more than once in the texts. In the 8th chapter of the Udana, it gives its name to the final group of 10 suttas, and among those 10 there are 4 that have been read aloud more than almost anything else in the canon, 4 that people encounter and then cannot quite leave behind. They are Suttas 8.1 through 8.4. They are about Nibna. Nibna, the word is Pali. You may have seen it spelled nirvana, which is the Sanskrit form, the one that reached English through a different channel. Both point at the same thing, or rather at the same difficulty. The word means loosely an extinguishing, a going out, the way a candle flame goes out when there is nothing left to sustain it. But what goes out, and where it goes, and whether going out is even the right way to describe it, that is what the 4 suttas in this chapter turn over, very slowly, without answering it cleanly. Because the utterances in the Udana do not answer cleanly. That is not what they do. Sutta 8.1. The scene is Paligma. The Buddha is staying there. He addresses the monks. And what he says is not an explanation, not a doctrinal lecture, not a sequence of steps. He says there is, monks, a sphere. He uses the word yatana, which means something like a domain, a dimension, a place where something obtains, where there is neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor air. Stop there for a moment. Earth, water, fire, air. In the tradition of this text, these are not just the 4 classical elements of ancient Indian thought. They are a shorthand for everything with physical form, everything that can be touched or measured or located. When those 4 are set aside, we have moved outside the world of things that can be touched or measured or located. He continues, neither the sphere of infinite space, nor the sphere of infinite consciousness, nor the sphere of nothingness, nor the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. These are the 4 formless meditative attainments, progressively refined states of mind that meditators in this tradition could enter and abide in. The tradition mapped them carefully. To say that this sphere is also not those 4 is to say this is not even the subtlest meditative state. It is beyond the most refined thing the mind can do on purpose. He continues, neither this world nor the other world, not the sun, not the moon. And then he says, I do not call it coming or going, nor standing still, nor dying, nor being born. Without support, without progress, without a footing. This, truly, is the end of suffering. And then, understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. And the verse arrived. You do not need to understand that. You are not being tested on it. You are lying in the dark, and a voice is reading you something very old, and the reading is the thing, not the comprehension. The comprehension, if it comes, comes later, or it doesn't come, and both are fine. The tradition understood that some things are said not to be understood, but to be heard, to pass through the ear and settle somewhere below the place where understanding operates. Rest for a moment. Notice the weight of wherever you are lying, the quiet that has been building since you first settled in. You do not need to hold any of it. When you are ready, we will continue. Sutta 8.3. This is the one. If you have encountered the Udana before, or if you have spent time around Theravada Buddhism or the insight meditation communities that grew in America largely through the second half of the 20th century, there is a good chance you have seen this quoted somewhere. On a wall, or in a book's epigraph, or in a talk. sometimes without attribution, because the words carry themselves. The scene is still polygma, the Buddha is still there, still among the monks, and he says, there is, monks, an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, an unconditioned. The Pali words are ajta apta akata asahata. Each one is a negation. Unborn, become, unmade, unconditioned, 4 refusals to describe it by what it is, and instead 4 statements about what it is not. He continues, if there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, there would be no escape from the born, become, made, conditioned, and then, but because there is that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, there is an escape from the born, become, made, conditioned. And then the verse arrived. That is the whole of it. It is not long. It does not argue its way to the conclusion. It states the conclusion and then breathes, and the verse is the breath. Read that sentence slowly again, the way it is worth reading at this hour. There is an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, an unconditioned. The tradition does not tell you what to do with that. It does not hand you a practice, a method, a 7-step approach to experiencing the unconditioned. The tradition, at least in this particular text, in this particular chapter, says only, there is this. We are among the born, the become, the made, the conditioned. And there is also something that is not any of those things. The two coexist. And the coexistence is the escape, not an escape you pursue. An escape that is simply available the way air is available to someone who has been holding their breath. You do not need to hold it any tighter now. Let us stay in the 8th chapter. Let us come to Suttas 8.9 and 8.10, and to an elder named Dabba Malaputta. Dabba was a monk. He had been in the order a long time. He was, by the time of this story, an arahant, which is the word for someone who has completed the path, in whom the conditions for further rebirth have been exhausted. He was old. He had been practicing since early in his life, and at the point this sutta describes, he had reached the end of what the body had to offer. He approached the Buddha. The account in Udana 8:9 says that he bowed and said, "Blessed One, it is time for Dabba to attain final nibbana." And the Buddha said, "Do, Dabba, whatever you think it is time to do." And so Dabba Malaputta rose into the air. This is what the text says. He rose into the air at the height of a palm tree, and he entered into the fire element, the meditative attainment in which the quality of fire becomes the basis of the mind's concentration, and his body was consumed by a flame that arose from within, and the ashes fell as a fine powder, and there was nothing left. The Buddha looked at what had happened, the monks around him, the quiet where Dabba had been, and he uttered this inspired utterance. And the verse arrived, now Sutta 8.10, the very next one. The monks who had witnessed this came to the Buddha. Where has the elder Dabba Malaputta been reborn? Where has he gone? And the Buddha used a simile. He said, "Consider a bar of iron, heated in a forge until it is glowing, until the iron itself has gone past what iron ordinarily is, until it is white and streaming with heat. And then it is struck, and sparks fly off it. Sparks fly off glowing iron, you may have seen this, or seen a picture of it, a blacksmith's hammer, a horseshoe, the struck metal and the shower of small bright points in all directions, each one a momentary fire. Where do those sparks go? They go out. One by one they fade, somewhere in the air around the forge, somewhere between where they left the iron and where they land, or somewhere in the act of landing. They do not accumulate somewhere. They do not proceed to another location and remain. They arose from the conditions of the hot iron and the blow of the hammer, and when those conditions were spent, they were gone. The Buddha said, with the elder Dabba Malaputta, who is an arahant, who has been fully liberated, it is not possible to say he went this way or that way. It is not possible to say he was reborn here or not reborn here. The simile of the sparks is the closest the text comes to an answer. No one knows where the sparks went. This is not evasion. The tradition is very careful, in more than one place, to say that the question is not answerable, not because the answer is hidden, but because the question assumes a kind of persistence that is no longer there. Asking where Dabba went is like asking where the sparks settled. The sparks did not settle. The spark was a temporary event made possible by a particular configuration of iron and heat and hammer, and when that configuration was spent, the event was over. This is not a teaching about oblivion. The tradition would push back on that framing too. It says, it is not any of these things you are reaching for. Not continuation. Not ending. Something the language built for continuation and ending cannot hold. And so the verse arrived. Understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. Take a slow breath. The glowing iron has nothing you need to figure out tonight. The sparks have already gone where they were going. You are still here, in your particular configuration of warmth and weight and breath. And the night is quiet around you. Let yourself be still. Now let us go to Chapter 5, Sutta 5. The Uposatha Sutta. Uposatha is the word for the observance days in the Buddhist calendar, the days when the moon is full, when the moon is dark, when it is half, the days given over to recitation of the rules and to intensified practice. This particular sutta takes place on such a day, and the community of monks is assembled. The text says the Buddha spent much of the night teaching the monks, going from subject to subject. And then, as the night was far advanced, he spoke about the ocean. He described 8 wonderful and marvelous qualities of the great ocean. The ocean gradually deepens. It does not plunge suddenly from the shore into great depth, but goes gently, gradually, as you move away from land. The ocean stays within its shores and does not overflow the land. The ocean does not keep a corpse on its surface, but quickly carries any dead thing to the shore. The rivers, the Ganges, the Yaman, the Asiravat, the Sarab, the Ma, all give up their names and their natures when they enter the ocean and become simply ocean. The ocean never fills, no matter how much flows into it. The ocean has only one taste, that last one. The ocean has only one taste. There are places in the ocean that are very cold and places that are warm. There are places near the mouths of rivers where the water has been sweetened or silted. There are shallow places and profound depths. There are different creatures living in different layers and regions. And yet, if you take water from any of it, from the surface or the bottom, from near the equator or far north, from beside a reef or in the open abyss, it has the same taste. Salt, and the Buddha said, just as the great ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt. So this Dhamma Vinaya has but one taste, the taste of liberation. Vimutti, a word that means being released, being set free, in the way a hand is released from a grip, in the way a bird is released from a cage, in the way a breath is released from a body that had been holding it without noticing. One taste. It does not matter which chapter you enter from, which teaching, which story, which verse. The first Bodhisatta, or the Leper Sutta, or the Nibna utterances, or this one. It does not matter whether you encounter it through John Ireland's careful English or through F.L. Woodward's version, which he titled Verses of Uplift, a phrase that has something warm and slightly old-fashioned in it, the way a letter from a century ago can feel both distant and close. Or through Bhikkhu Anandajyoti's version, which keeps the Pali and the prose settings both intact, so you can see exactly how the scene sits beside the verse. One taste. However you approach it, however the night finds you. The ocean does not require you to enter it at any particular point. You are already in it. Let us pause here. Take a slow breath, as slow as you can make it. Notice what has gone quiet in you, if anything has. You do not need to check. You do not need to verify that you are relaxed. Just rest, for a moment, in whatever is here. When you are ready, we can continue. There are 2 more suttas I want to sit with you before we come to the gathering in, before we walk back through what we have met tonight. Biya of the bark cloth. Udana 1:10. I mentioned earlier, in the early chapters of tonight, or in another chapter of another night, time has grown soft, that the Biya Sutta is the most widely quoted passage from the Udana in contemporary mindfulness circles. This is true. The instruction he received, those few lines about the seen and the heard, and the sensed and the cognized, have been excerpted and placed on websites and repeated in talks and printed in small books and offered to people in almost every form except the one the text actually offers it in. The form the text actually offers it in is this: a man named Biya was living on the coast, far from Svath. He had arrived at a kind of natural stillness and was being treated by people around him as an accomplished teacher. A thought arose in him, or, in the traditional telling, a deity came to him in the night, and the thought, or the deity, was this: you are not an arahant. You are not on the path to what you think you are on the path to. And the name of the one who can help you is the Blessed One, and he is staying in Svath. Biya walked to Svath. The text does not say how far he walked, but it implies a significant distance. He arrived while the Buddha was on his morning alms round, walking through the city carrying his bowl, receiving whatever food the householders placed in it. Biya fell to his knees in the road and said, "Teach me." The Buddha said, "This is not the right time. I am on the alms round." Biya said, "I do not know how long either of us will live. Please teach me." The Buddha said, "This is not the right time." Biya said it a 3rd time, and the Buddha stopped walking. What he said is very short. In the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the cognized, only the cognized. Then there is no you there. And where there is no you there is no here, no there, no in between. And this is the end of suffering. That is the whole of the instruction. Biya, by the traditional account, understood it completely, on the spot, in the road, while the city moved around them. The Buddha continued his alms round. Biya went to sit somewhere and reflect on what had just happened. On his way, he was killed by a cow. The texts use the word pas, large animal, and some translators render it as a cow, some as a rogue cattle, but the specificity of the dying is consistent across readings. He was gored. He died before the Buddha returned from the alms round. When the Buddha heard, he had the body prepared with care and told the monks, among those of quick understanding, Biya of the bark cloth is foremost. Now, that instruction, in the scene, only the scene, has been taken out of the text and offered as a meditation technique, as advice, as something to practice. And perhaps it is. But what the Udana gives you is different. The Udana gives you a road in a city, and a man who has walked a very long way, and a refusal twice, and a third asking, and a short statement, and a city going about its mourning, and a cow, and the Buddha walking back with his bowl. The instruction is inside a life. It is not abstract. It arrived because a particular man was on a particular road at a particular moment and asked until asking was heard. You do not have to do anything with it tonight. You are only overhearing it. And then there is Meghiya, Udana 4.1. Meghiya was a young monk who attended on the Buddha for a period. One day, while they were walking near the Jantu River, Meghiya saw a mango grove on the far bank. The grove was beautiful. It stood in a kind of light. The text suggests morning, the air clear over the water, and Meghiya thought, that is the place to meditate. He went to the Buddha and asked permission to go there and practice alone. The Buddha said, "Wait, there is no one else here. Wait until another monk arrives." Meghiya came back a second time and asked. The Buddha said, "Wait until another monk comes." Meghiya came back a third time and said, "You, Blessed One, have nothing more to develop. For me there is still work to do. Please let me go." The Buddha said, with a mild directness that you can hear in the Pali, even without knowing Pali, "Since you speak of striving, Meghiya, what can I say? Go." Meghiya went to the beautiful grove. He sat, and his mind, in this beautiful place he had chosen so carefully, filled with thoughts of sensuality, with thoughts of ill will, with thoughts of harmfulness. The thoughts he had gone to the grove to leave behind came right into the grove with him. He returned to the Buddha at the end of the day and told him what had happened. And the Buddha named the 5 things that ripen the liberation of the mind. Good friendship is the first, then virtue, then beneficial talk, conversations that turn the mind toward what is wholesome, then energy, and then wisdom. This is a teaching. It has the shape of a teaching. And yet it arrived because a young monk went to a beautiful grove and sat down and found that beauty does not empty the mind of what the mind was carrying when it arrived. The Buddha did not scold Meghiya. The teaching is not a correction. It is an observation made gently after something happened. 5 things ripen the liberation of the mind, and none of them is the quality of the grove. None of them is the quality of the light on the water. You cannot get there by choosing a more beautiful place. There is something tender in that. If you are the kind of person who has, at some point, believed that the right circumstances would settle you, that if the room were quieter, if the night were cooler, if there were less noise from the next room or the next house or the next part of your own mind, then you would be able to rest. You may be that kind of person. Most of us, at some hour, are. The grove was beautiful, and the thoughts came anyway. The Buddha told him, gently, what the grove could not do. And then, understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. The verse arrived, "Breathe slowly." You have been lying here for a while now, and the text has been moving through you, or around you, or simply alongside you in the dark, and you do not need to have held all of it. You do not need to have tracked every name, every sutta number, every chapter. F. L. Woodward called this collection Verses of Uplift, which has the feeling of something that comes at you, not loudly, but steadily, the way light comes into a room as the cloud moves and the morning arrives without having announced itself. John Ireland called it inspired utterances of the Buddha, and the word inspired has its root in the same place as the word for breathing, to inspire, to breathe in, just as Udana is a breathing out. Bhikkhu Anandajoti gave it back its prose settings, kept the scaffolding intact, let you see the scene and then the verse, let you sit in the nidna, the originating occasion, before the utterance arrived. All three of them were doing the same thing, in their different ways, trying to preserve the quality of overhearing. That is what this text is. 80 small scenes, and then a breath let out. 80 moments in which something was understood and then spoken, not because anyone asked, but because the moment had weight, and the weight needed somewhere to go. You have been overhearing it tonight. Now let us come to the gathering. We have met, tonight, an iron bar struck while glowing, and sparks that went somewhere no one could trace. We have met a man who went to stand at the edge of what he called liberation, and then disappeared in a small flame, and the ashes settled like powder, and the monks who were watching wanted to know where he had gone, and the answer was, consider the sparks. We have met the ocean, tasted in 4 separate places, always salt, always one flavour. The same taste in the teaching that runs from the first dawn utterance under the Bodhi tree all the way to the end of the 8th chapter in a town beside the Ganges. One taste, the taste of something being released. We have met a man on a road who asked 3 times and received a few words and died within the hour, and the Buddha said he was foremost among those of quick understanding. We have met a young monk in a beautiful grove, and the beautiful grove did not help. We have met the first 3 suttas of this collection, breathed out in the watches of a single night, alone under the tree where everything changed, the utterances of a mind turning dependent origination forward and backward like a key finding its lock, the doubts vanishing, one by one, as the dawn moved across the sky. We have met a serpent king, Mukhalinda, whose body coiled 7 times around a seated figure through 7 days of rain, whose great hood held the weather away, who became a young man and bowed when the sky cleared, and who received in return a verse about the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of harmlessness, the bliss of restraint. We have met a leper named Supabuddha who followed a crowd hoping for a meal and found instead the graduated teaching and the 4 noble truths and something the texts call stream entry, which is the first of the 4 stages on the path, the moment at which something becomes irreversible, the moment after which a particular kind of doubt about the path simply cannot be reconstituted. And he walked away from that, with his body still poor and sick and hungry, and he was gored by a young cow within the hour, and the Buddha said he had been reborn in the Tvatisa heaven, not because the dying was tragic, but because something had already been found that the dying could not take back. We have met the blind men and the elephant in the 6th chapter, the Jacanda chapter, born blind, and we have understood that the story Americans know from John Godfrey Saxe's 1872 poem, 6 Men of Indoston, the versified version that ended up in school curricula and management seminars, was already standing in this text, in this collection, in the city of Svath, centuries before Saxe was born. And we have understood that the Jain tradition told it too, and that Hindu and Sufi hands touched it as well, because some stories belong to a region and a problem rather than to a single tradition. But in this text it is the 6th chapter. It is a king who assembled the men. It is specific parts, the head like a water jar, the ear like a winnowing basket, the tusk like a ploughshare, the foot like a pillar, the tuft of the tail like a broom. They were not wrong about the parts. We have met a sphere where there is neither earth nor water, nor fire nor air, and no world, and no sun, and no moon, and no coming, and no going, and no standing still, a description by negation, a pointing that refuses to point at anything named. We have met the unborn, the unbecome, the unmade, the unconditioned. You do not need to remember any of it. If one image stayed with you, the serpent in the rain, the sparks from the struck iron, the ocean with its one taste, the leper walking away from the crowd toward the voice, the grove that looked like the answer and wasn't. If one of them settled somewhere in you as you listened, then let that be enough. More than enough. The tradition does not ask for retention. It asks only for presence, and presence is something you have been offering simply by lying here, simply by letting the voice come through the dark to you. The Udana has been in the world a long time. It was compiled before the Common Era, arranged into 8 chapters of 10 suttas each, given the name that means a breathing out. Placed between the Dhammapada and the Itivuttaka in the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is the collection of minor texts, which is itself part of the Sutta Piyaka, which is the second of the 3 great baskets of the Pali Canon. It has been copied by hand and chanted at dawn and translated into dozens of languages. F.L. Woodward sat with it in the 1930s and tried to carry its quality into English and called his version Verses of Uplift. John D. Ireland worked on it over decades and called it Inspired Utterances of the Buddha, and the Buddhist Publication Society carried it from Kandy in Sri Lanka into American Theravada communities where people read it quietly, on their own, far from any monastery. Bhikkhu Anandajoti kept the Pali beside the English, kept the Nidna beside the verse, kept the scene beside the breath, so the reader could see exactly how the original moves. All of them were trying to preserve the space between the scene and the verse. The moment in which something is understood and then spoken, not in response to a question, just because the moment was there. That is what 80 utterances have in common, not their subjects, not their settings, not the shape of the teaching inside them. They have in common the fact that no one was waiting for them. They arrived. The way rest arrives when you stop working at it, not because you earned it or assembled the right conditions, but because at some point the grip loosened, and what was already there could finally be felt. You have been doing that tonight, or you have been moving toward it, and both are fine. The moving toward it is already the thing. You do not need to arrive at some other state before the night counts as restful. You are already in it. The breath you are taking right now is already it. 80 scenes, and then a breath. 80 times the formula, understanding the significance of this, he uttered this inspired utterance. 80 times the moment meant something, and the meaning was breathed out, and then recorded, and then copied, and then carried, and then translated, and then read, again on a night very much like this one, to someone lying in the dark who was not being asked to do anything at all. That is all that ever happened. The serpent is still coiled in the storm, somewhere in the way that stories are still wherever they are set. The leper is still walking toward a voice he didn't know he was walking toward. The iron is still glowing. The sparks are still going where they go. The ocean is still one taste. You are still here. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Relaxing Subjects. Subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.